This podcast is hosted by the Center for the Futures of Native Peoples at Dickinson College in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, USA, which is about a mile from the former grounds of the Carlisle Indian Industrial School. We are working to bring honest interpretations of the Carlisle Indian School that was in operation from 1879 until 1918. We honor the 7,800 Indigenous students from across the United States who came to Carlisle. The Indian School is a significant place of remembrance for our Native peoples. Because of the endurance, strength, and prayers from our people who went to the Carlisle Indian School, many of us are here today. Guwatsi, hi relatives. Good to see all of you. Well, just kidding, I can't see you, but I can see Lynette. Good to be here with you, Lynette. How are you?
I'm good. How are you, Mandy?
Very good. Where are you zooming in from right now?
I am zooming in from the ancestral lands of the Ahtun, Pipash, Hohokam, Akchin, Yavapai. So I'm in Arizona.
Ah, okay. And so that's in like Phoenix area?
Yeah, Phoenix area, Maricopa.
Okay, awesome. Well, thank you so much for being on our show today. I'm here in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, and so it is definitely winter here. I'm getting used to like the four seasons. I lived in Arizona for 18 years, and where I lived in like Tucson, it was like hot and then less hot. So now
Ah,
being here is really different. So, but yeah, I'd love to just ask you, what is a fun fact that a lot of people don't know about you?
a fun fact about me that not a lot of people know about me is I am an accomplished flutist.
I did not know that.
Yes,
Tell us more. Tell us more.
I I have been playing the flute since I was in third grade and originally wanted to become a music teacher. And so played with the Navajo Nation band for many, 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 many years. And then auditioned for an orchestra a long time ago. Spent my summers at NAU music camp. Like I was really into being a flutist. So yeah, I mean,
Wow.
love me.
I did not know that, Lynn. That's amazing. That's really cool. So you and Lizzo are like,
Yeah, yeah. So when Lizzo came on scene, I was like, "Oh my god, she's like my idol."
that's so cool. Awesome. Well, thanks for sharing that fun fact. And I'd like to hear more about your story, your journey. So please share more with us who you are, how you got to where you are right now.
Absolutely. So I'm originally from Tonanas Desert, or Tuba City, which is in northern Arizona. My mom is from Tuba City. My father is from a small New Mexico town called White Rock, New Mexico. So I was born in Tuba City, but grew up until third grade in Crown Point, New Mexico. That's a little bit, and then we moved back to Tuba City, and that's where I went to middle school, junior high, and high school. My introduction in Navajo is Yat Esh e Lynette Stant Yanshe, Sandra Kinunshla, but that ni bushes chin, sit na duni dashe, torage eat me dashanella, akut ego dene estsan inshle. So, I in Navajo, that is, me making connection to all our relatives who are far and wide. I am a third grade teacher on the Salt River Indian Reservation and have been in the education field for over 20 years. So, yeah, that's me.
Awesome. So I actually got to meet Lynn, I believe it was around like 2020,
Yeah.
2019, 2020, somewhere around there. And I met you because you were designated as Arizona's Teacher of the Year. Can you share a little bit more about that?
Oh, yes. 2020. We all remember 2020, but I was named Arizona 2020 Teacher of the Year, and I was the first Indigenous woman to hold the title for the state of Arizona. So it was, I was embarking on some uncharted territory back then. And that's how I met you too, when you were still at U of A at that time. Did a speech down in can't remember where it was.
It was in Cells.
Oh, yes.
Cells, Arizona, Southern Arizona, on the homelands of the Honorary Nation.
Exactly, and that time was my first speech my very first speech as teacher of the year. So I was so nervous.
Oh, what was it like to be Arizona's first Indigenous Teacher of the Year? What was that experience like?
Oh, it's been such an honor, Mandy. It's definitely opened a whole lot of doors that weren't open to me prior to being named Arizona Teacher of the Year. I've been to Washington, D.C. many times advocating for the field of Indigenous education. Prior to being named Teacher of the Year, I probably wouldn't have had that opportunity, but to be invited, by different people that we celebrate and honor has been remarkable. Even got to see at that time it was President Trump address to the nation. I was a guest for with one of our senators and got to sit in and listen to his address to the nation. So that was really interesting. I've been able to advocate at many different levels, not only at the state and local level, but I've been asked to come and speak and different conferences and speak at different tribal nations. This summer, I was at Pascoyaki because they are opening their first Indigenous language school, and so they wanted me to be the opening speaker for that new endeavor for them. So,
So, for those who may not know, what is it like to be a third grade teacher?
first of all, I love teaching. I do absolutely love teaching, and I feel like my presence in the classroom is so important. When I was named Arizona Teacher of the Year, I received so many beautiful offers to leave the classroom. And I chose to stay because when I became a teacher, I always said I wanted to go back and be a teacher. At that time, it was I wanted to go home to be a teacher. Luckily, I was able to start my career in Salt River. And so I really feel my presence is so important because, in public schools, it is, especially here in the Valley, we there's not very many Indigenous teachers that are in the classroom, and so I really valued my place in front of my students. Being a third grade teacher is very tiring. I come home every day very tired. I, get to work at 7 in the morning and I don't get home till sometimes 7:30 at night. So it's very tiring, but my time with my kids is absolutely so fun. They're, at 3rd grade, they still love you. They still wanna hug wanna give you a hug, but they're so independent. So, it's great because I can be they get jokes and they can write, and I don't really have to hold hands too many times through projects or anything. They're pretty independent. You can also begin to hear their voice and their advocacy. We just wrote some opinion papers and we were talking about global warming, and they read a few stories about Nanook, a bear, a polar bear in Alaska, who was having a hard time finding food because the ice was melting. And so they really, to hear their voice come through their opinions about how important it is for us to acknowledge and do something about global warming was really inspiring for me. They have good ideas. I mean, they're the next leaders of their tribes.
So, your students are they all Indigenous students?
Yes, our school is 100% Indigenous because I teach in a tribally controlled school. Yeah. They're from the Salt River Indian community.
Oh, okay, okay. So what is it like to engage in the classroom with young Indigenous learners?
One of the things I really value is working in a tribally controlled school. So we're not bound so much by the regulations of state schools. So, for me to focus on Indigenous leadership and these are the heroes that we're going to study is quite different than today we're going to talk about all the presidents and things like that. So, being able to bring education to life within their community and making it meaningful to them is probably the best part of my job.
Hmm. So about how old are they, your students?
They're 8 and 9.
Oh,
They're little.
oh, so cute. We've had a chance to interact and so for those who may not know, Lynette is part of our Center for Futures of Native People advisory board member, and recently you've come to Carlisle, Pennsylvania for the first time. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you just heard me take a deep sigh because yeah, it was deep.
Mm. Can you share more about your experience coming to Carlisle for the first time and how you process being here in light of you teaching our young Indigenous people who were the very age of some of these students that were sent here to Carlisle?
Absolutely. The impact that Carlisle has had on me touches my life every single day since I've been there. I think about Carlisle every day. I arrived to Carlisle almost at midnight. I was picked up in a van from Dickinson College, and the driver was driving me into Carlisle. And we were just chatting about, the location, the area. He was giving me a little bit of history of the economic endeavors of the area. And then as we approached Carlisle, and it was like 11:30, 11:45 at night. As we got into Carlisle, it was a feeling that just changed. And I saw these houses, going by, and I could feel something in my body, and I wish I could describe it, but it was different, and it was heavy. I could feel some heaviness. And I asked the driver, I said, "Are we in Carlisle?" And he said, "Yes." And I was like, "Oh." And as I was moving, as we were driving down the road, I started thinking about all our relatives, our young relatives that arrived in the middle of the night. And I, at that time, as a grown woman, was feeling confused. I didn't know where I was. Where am I going? I don't know where my hotel is. All these different buildings. The architecture's different. The layout of the city is different. Everything was new. And I had a little bit of anxiety about it. And I was thinking, I put myself in our early, those young relatives that were just arriving in the middle of the night. And I was so overwhelmed. I was so overwhelmed. And I slept with the lights on that night in my hotel. It was a lot. And the next day when I woke up, I opened the blinds and I could see this beautiful, huge tree. And I wish I knew what kind of tree it was, but it was right outside my window. And beautiful fall colors. The tree had changed colors. And I called my husband and I was telling him about my ride in. I started speaking from the voice of a mother. How would I have felt if my child was gone? And I'm getting a little emotional. I cried like a cry I have never cried before. My mom heart hurt. My mama heart hurt. And I cried, just thinking about all those moms who, their children were taken from them and they were sent to this place that some of them never saw their moms again. And so it was overwhelming. It was an overwhelming experience for me. And that was just the morning. That was not even getting to Dickinson College. That was just, you know, talking on the phone in the morning. Yeah. You definitely have to and I heard the podcast where you were the podcast about preparing for Carlisle. And, I listened to it before I went, and then I listened to it after I went. And everything you spoke in that podcast is so true. You have to mentally, physically, and spiritually prepare yourself to be there. Yeah. So that was my immediate reaction when I went to Carlisle. And then of course seeing the campus itself, stopping when you were taking us to the airport and we stopped at the train station. And this is where the kids would arrive, and you telling us the story of how they would arrive in the middle of the night, and the townspeople would come out to, watch. And then they would walk to the barracks in the middle of the night. And I just, you know, both my parents went to boarding school. My mom went to Anadarko, Oklahoma. That's where she went to boarding school. And my dad went to Chamawa, Oregon. That's where he went to boarding school. So I'm the product of that. And my boarding school trauma is I never learned my language. My parents didn't teach it to us, didn't speak it. When they spoke, they always spoke to us in English. And not by a fault of their own. They just as they strongly believe that we want to give our kids the best opportunity, so we're only going to teach them English. But now as my parents age, I feel more hurt. I feel robbed in a lot of ways because when my mom goes and my dad goes, with them goes those traditional prayers and those traditional sayings. And that hurts, especially as a mom, that hurts because I cannot pray for my daughter the way my mom prays for us. Yeah. And so it's the impact of Indigenous boarding schools run deep for a lot of people. Yeah. And as a teacher now in the classroom, I see it. I see the impact that boarding schools have had on this generation for sure.
Hmm. Gosh, thanks for sharing that. Lynn, my throat is getting tight. Oh my gosh. Like I can feel your emotions here as you're walking through the story. I mean, I'm sitting here in my office, which is like a mile away from, where our Indigenous relatives are buried in the former site of the school. And it just is a whole nother layer and level of coming here. And I've tried to express this in different ways in these times of story. And for those that are listening, like, because of scheduling and so forth, like, Lynn, actually, you didn't go on to the actual, former grounds of the Indian school, but when we were going to the airport, passed by it 3 times. We went 1 time and then turned around, came back, and then went 1 more time. And and I remember you saying too, like, it was almost like it wasn't time for you yet to go into the barracks yet. Like, can you share a little bit more about, like, what that means to you? Because 'Cause you're coming back again as part of our board, but, how do you
Right.
conceptualize that? How do you process that?
I really feel that our young ancestors that were there were protecting me in some way, like, she's not ready yet, you know? And I value that, and I totally 100% respect that. And the trip played itself out the way it needed to play out, you know? I prayed before I left Phoenix. I prayed when I got there, and I said, However I am supposed to be here at this time, it'll all play out the way it's supposed to be." And it wasn't my time. It wasn't my time to go on campus because even now, even though I've just gone to those places outside of the gate, to the train station, sitting in our board meeting, it profoundly affected me. And like I said, even now, every day I think about Carlisle. I think about the impact it has had on me. And it has changed me as a teacher. I definitely came back. Okay, so before I left to Phoenix, we were in the middle of testing. We are at the end of testing. And I was so hard on my kids. We need to, get better scores. We need to grow by this many points. And, I was really hard on them. And being in Carlisle really allowed me the opportunity to step back and say, wait a minute. What is the legacy I want to pass on to my students? And what did those our young relatives in Carlisle, what kind of teacher did they deserve? I want to be that teacher. I want to be the educator that they deserved, that should have been advocating for them, who should have stood before them and guided them, been the guide for them. I wanna be that for my kids, and I think that's the lasting impact that Carlisle had on me. So when I came back to my classroom, I found myself being more patient, being a better listener to my student, really engaging in the laughter that they bring in the morning and sharing in story with them and really hearing their stories this time, not just saying, "Oh, yeah, yeah," you know, but really listening to them. And I feel, you know, that has been the impact from Carlisle is it has definitely made me a better teacher for sure. And it's not about test scores. It's about building a relationship. It's about building relationships because our young relatives at Carlisle deserve that. They truly deserved somebody who should have been their advocate. They deserved an Indigenous teacher standing before them.
Gosh, Lynn, that hits me deep. That's really profound what you just shared. And I think you provide a lot of valuable insight in this space, especially in the realm of education, right? Like there's a lot of people who too are educators who are listening and wanting to learn more about how do you share our living histories of our people in the classroom. So you've shared some insight. I have so many questions to ask you just from the perspective of a teacher. And I want to ask you this question because this would be an interesting story, another perspective that we haven't heard yet on these podcast episodes. But what is it like to work with the families of these young learners that are in your classroom?
You know, our families of the students that I work with, they just want the best for their student, and they want to make sure that their student is getting the best, whatever that might mean to them. Whether it's time with the teacher, whether it's, from an academic standpoint or whether it's from a relationship building standpoint. Each parent has something different. And when it comes to and I see this most when it comes to parent-teacher conference time. I have a lot of parents who come in and are just so afraid to meet with the teacher. I have some parents who will not even look at me, and they're so afraid that I'm going to say something bad about their student or something bad about their parenting, when really my focus of parent-teacher conferences is really about community and building a relationship with them. I wanna hear what you want for your student so that I can adjust and make myself that for your student. And that's really the purpose of my parent-teacher conference with parents. And so, they're that lasting impact of school is a scary place is still very prevalent, is still very prevalent. And so I have to honor what their educational journey was, whether it was good or whether it was bad. I have to sit and honor what that was for them. And they may not say it and speak it out loud, but it's written all over their face, through their body, all of that. Yeah.
Hmm. I would assert that, the young people that came to Carlisle, that they're coming from families who have those same sentiments of love and care and admiration for their young people and for their children. And for you to be able to work with our Indigenous family, our Indigenous youth, like that's a really important calling. And I just honor you for that, Lynn. That's as you mentioned it even before we got onto the Zoom here, that you're tired and it's a labor of love, I'm sure a lot of times. And I want to ask this question too. I had asked this recently on another podcast episode with Dr. Joni Sweeney, and shout out to her. And I had asked her, what is it like to be a mom? And I want to ask you that same question too. Like, what is it like to be an Indigenous mom?
Oh gosh, that's a big question because I remember listening to that podcast and you asking Dr. Hathaway that same question. So I was a single mom for a really, really long time until I met my husband who is, Kanaka. He's from, North Shore, Oahu, and my daughter is part Sandia and part Laguna. So she's, you know and Navajo. The Navajo part is easy, but I also want her to move through life as a strong Pueblo woman because that's who she is, and so It's tough, especially if you're raising a child in an urban setting because they're not exposed to things that we take for granted at home, whether it's making bread, learning to make bread, learning to and I know this because her dad's mom taught me a lot about a lot of things. One of them was baking bread, building the fire in the oven outside and all of that, and I wish I could teach those things to my daughter. Being a mom is a lot of work. It takes time, it takes patience. You can't be a mom in passing. It's having in-depth conversations with your children and your child. And like I said, I want my daughter to grow up to be a strong Pueblo woman. And thank goodness, she has really good godparents. Her godparents are from Acoma, her Baba, and makes sure that she always says, "Baba, find a nice Acoma boy." And my daughter always says, "Where am I going to find an Acoma boy here in Arizona?" But I do little things at home, as much as possible to help her through that process. Always calling her by her Indian name Shawi Bishbina, and so always calling her by her Indian name as much as possible. Those little things that she takes for granted, taking her home to Acoma so she can be with family and learn what she needs to learn. So, but it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work raising an Indigenous child in urban setting, for sure, for sure. And you have to make peace. Well, I guess you don't have to make peace, but I have had to make peace with some things that are just not going to happen. And one of them is, I would love to have her have a stronger connection to culture, but it's tough.
Hmm.
Yeah.
I appreciate you sharing that. One another aspect too in thinking about motherhood and connecting with relatives and family, and I think about also the curriculum too in the classroom and that experience. And I was curious to know what are your recommendations, especially to non-Indigenous teachers who actually teach a lot of our Indigenous students, but what is your recommendation to Indigenous teachers, to educators to integrate our living histories, to integrate our stories into the classroom or other learning settings?
Mhm, mhm. I always say, for our state of Arizona, I always say, know whose land you are working on, first of all. Learn about them. Learn what their culture is. Learn their history. We walk on indigenous territories all over this country. You can't drive anywhere without being on indigenous land. So know whose land you are on, first of all. But the other thing, and I take these words from you, I use it every day, Mandy. How can I indigenize this? When I sit down to plan every day, that is the one question that I lead with. How can I indigenize this for my student? How can I make this representative, represent the community that we are in? Whether it's saying the date in autumn, greeting them in autumn, but how can I take this lesson on Martin Luther King and connect it to their community? That's what takes time. That's why I'm there till 7:30 at night. That's I'm indigenizing curriculum all the time. Right now, I'm thinking about phonics and how this morning my students had culture and they're learning autumn, and I'm teaching phonics from American English. They don't mix. Their sounds are so different. The orthography is so different. I want them I w and it's, upping my game too. How can I seamlessly move through both of those orthographies throughout the day so that my kids can seamlessly hear that? And for non-Indigenous teachers, really understanding that your Indigenous student is part of a family that has roots spread out all over. So when they speak of family, they're not just talking about their mom and dad and blood siblings, they're talking about grandma and their cousin and, all of those things. And so their stories are so complex. When my daughter was young, there was an article published by Arizona State University Journal of the American Indian, I think it's called, in one of their journals, and they talk about Pueblo students and how during certain times of the year those students may be out of school and how to really respond to that as a teacher. And I remember printing that article and giving it to my daughter's teachers because at that time, I was taking her home a lot to experience those things. And so, and just being open to the idea that your Indigenous student comes with a lot of experience and they may not do things on paper. They may be expressing their knowledge through oral ways. And so, and being able to say, you know what, I get that. I get that. I respect that. And I honor that.
Mm. So here in Dickinson at the college, we're going to start school soon, and we're recording this podcast on January 17th. And so it's school's coming, and I'm teaching for the first time in this capacity in a small private liberal arts school on the East Coast. And I taught many years at the University of Arizona undergraduate class, but it's been a few years since I've taught, and I've just learned so much and just being here in Carlisle. So for those who are listening, I want to share just a couple of strategies and activities, practices that I'm going to integrate into the classroom that might help you think about how do you indigenize a space? How do you center Indigenous voices? So one thing I'm going to try this semester, and I think it's going to be really challenging, but I'm going to try it, where I'm going to have the students call me by my Indian name. And I have 2 of them. I have Sipun, which means big guns, like strong, like big guns. I got that from Inupiaq elders in Alaska, in Kotzebue area. And then my other Indian name is Kautui. And so I don't know a meaning to it, but so I have 2 Indian names. So I'm going to ask them to call me one of the 2. And that be like one of my, the ways that they would address me in the classroom. And this is the reason why, because here in freaking Carlisle, Pennsylvania, when you look at the old Indian school enrollment cards, a lot of times you'll see the Indian name of
Oh,
the students who are coming here.
yes, Mandy. You just sent us an email with the list of names. And I was reading them. I was with my daughter and we were reading through them. And I was like, what's so hard and heartbreaking for me is to see their Indian name. Oh, that I had to sit with that one for a little bit because once I saw their Indian name, they really they became real to me. They became real to me. And and I had to sit with that. So absolutely what you're saying is so true.
Mhm. It's recently, Jim Gurenser, one of our colleagues and relatives, one of our team members, here, we work very closely with Jim in the archives, and his team had done a lot of data cleaning and different parts with the archives. I don't know all the lingo of the archive language, but basically cleaned up the data in regards to our Pueblo students. And there was about 305, give or take, of our Pueblo students on this list, this Excel sheet. And Jim and his team, they did an excellent job just to have their name and the tribal affiliation if it was available, and then any kind of links to archival documentation. And when you look at that list, over 200 are from our Laguna community. And when you see their Indian names too, like, I'm trying to recenter things here and rethink of how I'm doing things, like where I sign my emails with my Indian name, and it's already in my email signature, but where I am more intentional to put like, okay, this is from Call Dewey, like. So that's something I'm going to try in my classroom. So we'll see how this goes. And it really is a rewiring, because it's easy to just say, hey, Dr. Mandy, like it's very easy to just say that. Right. You'll remember that. Right. And so I think I would probably say they're going to say Dr. Sapoon because it's a little bit easier to say. So, but I'm just kind of curious to see how that's going to work out. Some other like assignments, what I'm going to do is so in the cemetery, there's, I don't know, over 150-ish, 140-ish students buried there. And when I go there, I oftentimes don't know the story of our relatives who are there. So in the classroom, what I'm going to do is assign each student, I have 25 students, assign them 4 or 5 students that are buried there, and to come up with about a paragraph of just a biographical paragraph of who and what their stories are based from the archives. So that when relatives come here, we can have this like PDF of sorts. When they go there, they're like, oh, okay, at least like this one is from here. Because mind you, a lot of the headstones too have inaccuracies on them.
Mhm.
There's over 100 errors on the headstone. So that the tribal communities sometimes aren't even accurate. So if I can have this document that's curated by us, right, by our community, then that can help us as other relatives are coming here and other people want to learn more and connect. So that's another assignment I'm going to do. Some other assignments, my class is called Indigenous Storytelling, Digital Media and Beyond, and we're using the Indian school, right? Our experiences as the ground, the framework for this. And I'm gonna have them do like an assignment where they look up like 5 to 10 indigenous businesses, look at their branding, look at their story, look at their logo, what colors are they using so that they can see the expression from our Indian people. Like that's another example, right? And that's a fun assignment. I find we did that before at the University of Arizona, and you see all these cool brands of our native people that are have this creativity that comes out in these different forms, like a business, right? So that's another activity that I'm going to integrate too. And then also to being mindful of space for those that are listening to, like get your students outside of the classroom. I'm a big proponent of that, where we're going to do a photography exercise where we're going to go outside and I'm going to teach them how to take pictures of the different elements that are around us, right? So it's really being cognizant of the space that you're in. And we're actually going to go do barracks too. So again, I'm kind of just thinking like, how can I expose them to the land and to the people and to our stories? So that gives you some ideas, a little bit of some ideas for those that are listening to kind of think again. And then one last assignment that I'll share is that, which I actually want to share this with you, Lynn, too, and partner with you, hopefully, is that I want our students to write handwritten letters and encourage our Indigenous youth and send them out from Carlisle to our Indigenous communities. Because there is a letter writing tradition here, right? Like that were tons of letters that were written about our Indigenous people. And but to actually send it out in a good way, I think is a powerful statement coming from Carlisle out to our Indigenous people. So I was thinking about you, and I have another friend in mind too, to pick some students, give us their first names. What should we focus on? And we can send out letters to the students.
That is such a good one. Oh, Mandy, that would be so powerful. That would be so powerful. I think one of the things that as teachers, and I'm speaking for myself, like we really have to be aware of our own microaggressions, and what do we do to bring down others that we don't really think about, doing that self-reflection and reevaluating our own selves in those microaggressions. And I think about, and I was telling my students when I got back of my experience in Carlisle, and I was telling them that, microaggressions towards Indigenous people still exist. And I was telling them about my experience when I was walking from my hotel that morning after I had called my husband to Dickinson College, where this white van pulled up next to me. And I was wearing a ribbon skirt and moccasins and clearly did not look like I was from there, and stopped. And, the person inside the van rolled their window down and told me to go back where I'm from. And so and they were like, "What? Somebody said that to my teacher?" You could see in their little 3rd grade minds, they were trying to make sense of how people can be so mean. And in that moment, when it happened to me, it took me back to when I was a young college student, at a university down south of Arizona. I won't say which one, but it happened at a university down south, and it really I was with my college roommate, and we were going to unfortunately, we were going to a fraternity party, and she used to date one of the football players there. And so they let her in. And I was walking behind her and the guy stopped. He put his foot out at the door and he said, "Well, let me see your number." And I was like, "What are you talking about?" He's like, "Let me see your number." I was like, "I have no idea what you're talking about." He goes, "Aren't all you Indians branded? Let me see your brand." And I was like, "Hmm, this isn't for me." But it's those kinds of microaggressions that really can have detrimental effects on you. Luckily, I'm a strong and empowered Indigenous woman that white man didn't do anything to me. It was like, "Oh, okay." And, I moved on. But for my kids, I wanna be able to be that for them so that if they come across a microaggression like that, they know that they are secure in who they are and where they come from, and they know that those microaggressions aren't them. And I think that's a really strong message, like, the letters that you are thinking of writing is one of the foundations to establishing that for those kids. So I think it's such a good idea, Mandy.
Aw, thanks. I figured, like, I'm just gonna counter everything here. Like what the school did, Imma do the opposite. Like, it's just oh, this place is something else. It's so multi-layered, multifaceted, intergenerational, intertribal, and it's just I'm just so glad that I have a support system like you, and I've known you for a number of years now, and so as we, close up today, we shared a lot of story and different examples, but is there anything else you'd like to share before we close our story time?
Actually, yeah, this is a fun story. This is a few years ago, I sewed a ribbon skirt for every single one of my 3rd grade girls. Any girl in 3rd grade, I sewed them a ribbon skirt because what I recognized was during Indigenous Heritage Week at our school, when it came to the last day when we would all gather for the final performance, a lot of my girls didn't dress up. And it was because they didn't have a ribbon skirt. They didn't have an autumn ribbon skirt. So I was like, I sew. Why don't I make them one? So the following year, I made sure every single girl in 3rd grade had a ribbon skirt. And then I was having a conversation with one of the girls. She was older. She moved out of 3rd grade. And she was like, "You should teach me how to sew." And so I was like, "Hey, I'm going to start a after school sewing club. And I'm going to empower these girls to sew their own ribbon skirts." It's been a couple years now that I've had this sewing club and they've been sewing their ribbon skirts, but it's been so meaningful to me. I mean, I was fortunate enough growing up that all my traditional regalia was provided to me. My mother sewed, my aunties sewed. And so if I needed jewelry, I got it. I felt like it shouldn't cost a lot of money to sit in ceremony or to sit in all of these places where we can gather. It shouldn't cost us a lot of money. So empowering the girls to sew their own ribbon skirts has been one of my passions lately. And so I just want to share that story because there's lots of different ways we can empower young people to be secure in who they are and to walk with pride and just be proud of who they are.
I think that's a really amazing story, Lynn. And for those who may not know, within a lot of these Indian schools, sewing was a part of the daily life of our Indigenous women, young girls. And it's amazing that you're doing that, Lynn. You're transitioning this knowledge. I need to join your class. Let me come be with your 4th graders.
Yeah, come join us.
Yeah, I need to learn how to sew. But recently we were at the archives and going through just different photographs, and we were looking at all these clothing, and I was asking like, because there's some that had the really puffy, like the Victorian style dresses, and I was learning that like, gosh, like our Indian students would sew and make these elaborate, beautiful dresses, and I just want to emphasize that these traditions of creativity and paying attention to detail, like that runs so strong in our community, and you're a testament to that. In this example of making ribbon dresses. And so I think that's a powerful connection and parallel to here, I think. So
Yeah. Like I said before, I really want to be that Indigenous educator that they deserved, that those children deserve. And if I can't do it for them, I can't step back in time. At least I can do it for my students now.
that is profound, Lynn. I love that. So I just love you, Lynn. I appreciate you. Thank you so much for spending time with us today. And we look forward to hosting you again when you come back to Carlisle and welcome you.
Thank you, Mandy. Mandy, you are on an amazing journey. What you have done for the center and for Carlisle, you were meant to be there. You were meant to be there, and just honor the journey that you're on right now. I know it drains you. See power in your medicine, but because you're where you're supposed to be right now.
Hmm.
Absolutely. You're the voice of those of our relatives who were there.
I appreciate that, Lynn. Thank you so much. That's heartwarming to me. That I appreciate that affirmation, those affirmations. That means a lot. Thank you, everyone. As you can see, oh my goodness, these times of gathering and sharing stories, it's sacred. It's ceremony. It's not just a podcast. Like these stories are being preserved from our Indigenous perspective, and that's power, especially coming out of this place in Carlisle, Pennsylvania.
Yes, for sure.
So, Dawai, thank you so much, relatives, for listening. Thank you, Lynn. I appreciate you. And
For inviting me. Thank you so much.
Dawai, we look forward, relatives, to sharing more story with you. So stay tuned, and everyone have a wonderful day. Talk to you later.
Bye.
Much love to our relative Kina Jefferson, who contributed to editing this episode. Kina is an undergraduate here at Dickinson College and part of the Center for the Futures of Native People Student Advisory Board. Kina is from Hawaii, so I say mahalo, Kina. You are a phenomenal leader, and we love you. Many thanks to our relative Fawn Wood, who is Plains Cree Salish musician from St. Paul, Alberta, Canada. This episode features her song, Kwalasoet, from her 2015 Kikeayana album. And excuse my pronunciation, but you spell the album Kikawiynaw. We follow each other on TikTok, and I asked her for permission to use her music in our podcast. And so I'm grateful she said yes. Her voice is absolutely beautiful, moving, and brings so much healing. She won the Juno Award for Traditional Indigenous Artist of the Year in 2022. Stream her music and follow her on Instagram, YouTube, and Facebook at Fawn Wood, and on TikTok at fawn.wood. If you want to learn more about the Carlisle Indian Industrial School, visit the Carlisle Indian School Digital Resource Center at carlisleindian.dickinson.edu. Many thanks to Brenda Landis for teaching me the technical process of producing a podcast. Learn more about the Center for the Futures of Native Peoples at dickinson.edu/CFNP. Follow us on TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, and X at CFNP Dickinson. Authenticity is important. You can learn more about me at amandacheremiah.com. And you spell my last name Cheromia. You can also connect with me at Dr. Cheremiah on TikTok, Instagram, X, and LinkedIn. You can also email me at cheromia@dickinson.edu. I honor my 6 relatives that I know of so far who came to the Carlisle Indian School. Because of them, I am here. And in the words of Chief Philip Whiteman Jr. from Northern Cheyenne and a descendant from the Carlisle Indian Industrial School, he says, I love you and there is nothing you can do about it. Hashtamegume, Dwai, thank you so much for listening, relatives. Until next time.